So, hello and welcome. I welcome Josie Hess, the co-director of the film Morgana. She directed it together with Isabel Peppert. And we also welcome Morgana Muses, the protagonist, the feminist adult film director. Thank you so much for being here with us, and thank you so much for the film that we're going to see at the festival, or some of the audience who will see this conversation have already seen it. So my first question would be, how did you two start working together? Since we know that, the documentary wasn't the first thing you did together, and it came from you guys knowing each other beforehand.
Well, I should firstly also say I'm really sorry our wonderful co-director Isabel Peppard can't be here, but she's also very excited to take part in the festival. Do you want me to go, Mog, or do you want to have a crack?
Yeah, I think you can go. Thanks, Josie.
Okay. I have to cast my mind back because it's been it's been a while, but I believe that we first connected because I was in film school and I was trying to make a documentary about female pleasure. And I found out that my lecturer was actually Anna Brownfield, who was a feminist, like of all the people, was a feminist pornographer. So I emailed her and I asked if I could intern on her next project. And it just happened to be Morgano Muses' film, A Call for Help. And we met, and I think we bonded over stationery and like spreadsheets and just like all good things, organizational shoots. And I think after that, Morgana, you invited me to like come and just do little bits of shooting here and there. And we just started getting to know each other from there.
Yeah.
So after how much time of working together did you come up with the idea to do a documentary? And was it a joint decision and idea? And perhaps also, how did you plan it when you first started to think about doing this documentary?
Well, we definitely didn't know it was a feature when we started. So I think the story basically goes that I had been working with Isabel Peppard on some horror stuff. And at the same time, I was starting to make porn with Morgana. And Morgana had decided to do this incredible thing for her 50th birthday and was looking for someone to direct it. And I was like, I don't know, 22 or something. And I was like, I'm too scared. But I do know this wonderful woman, Isabel Peppard. So I thought that maybe she could do the directing job. And so we kind of all met, and Isabel and I kind of talked about how Morgana had only a few years previously been a housewife living in a rural town. And we were like, who is this incredible woman? Like, how has she gotten there? So while Isabel didn't end up directing the birthday project, I think you directed that yourself, Morgana. You ended up just doing it. But
Part of it, yeah.
I think it was from then we all kind of got hooked and were like, oh, maybe we could tell a short story at least about her birthday and everything. And it kind of just spiraled honestly from there. I don't think anyone knew that it would become the beast that it is.
I was wondering how much of the documentary, I mean, of course, there's you and there's your co-director, but of course there's also Morgana, who's also a director. So perhaps I'm interested a bit in how much decisions were there on all sides of, what are you going to show? How are you going to, do this? And also, what were some of the biggest challenges and toughest situations? Because, I mean, you had to make, because you've been doing the film for 5 years, and I can imagine there have been many decisions and, many just thoughts of what to put inside and what not, and so on.
Well, Mog, maybe you can speak a bit about the control and
Well, I actually, because I was just the subject of the documentary, I knew that I had to relinquish a lot of control to Josie and Isabel. But thankfully, they always would communicate with me. So if there was anything that would be too hard for me to deal with, I had a say in that. But overall, I relinquished all my control as a director and purely was a subject.
And we were really really lucky that you were such an incredibly gracious subject. Like, you were very forthcoming and very kind with the time that you gave us. So we honestly couldn't have asked for a better subject. And I think your other question was about difficult choices about what to include and what not to include. So yes, we did overshoot. I think we we probably had maybe 100 hours or more of footage. Like, it's a lot of a life to cut down. I think ultimately we just had to pick what served, you know, Morgana's central story the best. So I think that's kind of how we got around it. But it was a film very much made in dialogue. Like, we had lots of back and forth conversations about it, and Isabel and I have like a really nice sort of dance in terms of conversation, in terms of co-directing. So it's a lot of like, maybe like this, maybe like this, maybe like this. And we tried everything. That's probably why it took us so long. There's definitely some cuts of the film that are like, you know, 2 hours, 3 hours long, with very different sort of feels to them. But I'm really happy with sort of where we ended.
Yeah, and sorry, and I think the only time I had a bit of difficulty was going back to my hometown in Albury and having all of these memories come back to me, and a lot of them were very sad and very difficult for me to process. But like I said, with the help of Josie and Isabel, I was able to overcome any of my fears and any concerns that I may have had.
Perhaps, since you just mentioned going back there, and could you talk a bit about your background and your, you know, your childhood, which you also mentioned in the film? How do you think it influenced of the person you are today? I also hear your parents are Slovenian, actually. So
they are.
I'm interested a bit in that as well, and just in the sense of feeling this connection a bit.
Yes, I was born to Slovenian parents, and I was born in Sydney, but at the age of 2, I moved to a desert town called Kubapidi, where we lived underground for 10 years. And then I moved back to Sydney, and I lived in Sydney until at the age of 25, when I then moved to Albury to be with my future husband. I had a fairly repressed childhood. Sex and sexuality was never discussed in the family, and I was always curious, but always ashamed to want to be able to explore my sexuality. So after the divorce, I took it upon myself to give myself permission to explore my sexuality and explore my body and what it could mean to me. So I think my childhood had a big effect on me, because I wasn't allowed to explore until I got a divorce at the age of 45.
And in the documentary, you have this expression that I like. I mean, I found really good expression to call facade living.
Yes, exactly.
And I was wondering, when I was watching the documentary, which is, it's amazing in how honest it is, and I really enjoyed that it's not this documentary where you go from, you know, a bad point in your life to a good point in your life, and you know, it would be very black and white, but it's very nuanced and complex in this sense. But I was just wondering, what was the point in your life and afterwards also in your director career, when you felt that you are living the life you want, and that this facade is gone in a way?
I think nearly immediately after my divorce, I decided I wanted to be true to myself. I wanted to explore the world. I wanted to explore myself and my sexuality. I was raised to believe that my main mission in life was to get married and have children, and I achieved that. And then when I asked for the divorce, I knew it was time for me to explore me now.
And when you entered this feminist porn community / industry in a way, were there any fears you had before, you know, of how you're going to be accepted, and then what was the reception that you got, and how do you feel inside of this community that you entered late in life, so to say?
Yes, to be quite honest, it wasn't my intention to go into feminist pornography, but when I did, I felt so empowered and liberated that I wanted to continue making films. And I was a little bit worried about how people will view me. I was a bit concerned, but to my shock and surprise, the reactions has been so positive, and it just encourages me to continue doing it because the reaction has been positive. I get so many people contacting me, telling me I'm an inspiration, and that gives me the courage to continue.
And what would you say that is your audience, the audience that, you know, watches your films, the films that you make? Is there... Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
No, I was just wondering if there's, if you think you have a specific audience, or is it a very wide, you know, audience from all over the age, you know, groups,
yes,
from all genders and so on?
Well, funnily enough, I thought I was going to be focused on the plus 40 side, but I'm actually very surprised that we get correct me if I'm wrong, Josie, but wasn't our big audience men in their 30s?
Yeah, our Google like it's a lot of younger men.
Okay.
So it wasn't what I was expecting, no.
And what are some of the responses that you appreciate the most, or perhaps some responses that you found surprising when you started doing these films?
I think what means the most to me is when people contact me and tell me their story, which is similar to mine, and they tell me that I've inspired them to not think that their life is over, that their sex life, their sexuality can still be continued. There's no expiration date. They just feel inspired enough to think life still has meaning ahead of them.
I was also wondering, in the film, we see that you, at a certain point, you moved to Europe, to Berlin.
Yes.
And I was also wondering, is this decision connected to the, you know, this feminist, independent porn making community? And what is the difference, perhaps, that inside this community in Australia, in Europe, and how do you feel it, both of you?
Okay, I went to Berlin because to live in Berlin for 9 months, but I'd visited Berlin the previous 2 years, and I found a community of like-minded people, and particularly the rope community. And I was able to explore the kinky side of my sexuality, the BDSM side of my sexuality, something which I wasn't able to do in Australia. I feel that in Australia, we're a little bit more repressed than we are in Europe. Europe, you can just be yourself. And I just found that I was able to learn so much more in Europe and to explore a lot more in Europe.
And I guess for me, from just an industry perspective, it's just very small in Australia. Like, we definitely have some mainstream porn companies and stuff, but in terms of supporting a full, like, you know, ethical feminist porn, like, we just don't have the same numbers as, say, the US or Europe. So it's like there's some cool shit happening, but just not maybe on the same scale. So it does feel a little bit like more small and insular, I think.
And when you say feminist porn, what, in your opinion, makes this kind of porn that you make different? What makes it different from this mainstream, perhaps the so-called big porn? And what is the thing that subverses, you know, the general porn, the porn that perhaps some of the people view as very, you know, stereotypical representations of sexuality and genders and so on? What for you guys is the thing that is most important in doing that?
Yeah, so I think there's a big distinction between it's really comes down to the mode of production more than the content itself. So for us, it's having an ethic, like we get marketed as feminist porn. I think that comes down to possibly if you're making like a feminist theoretical production, but honestly, we come under the banner of ethical in general, just because the mode of production is above the board. We treat our performers well. Everything is all about consent and positive consent. It's all sort of baked into that aspect. And I think there's a perception that all mainstream, like, of course, some mainstream porn can be ethical as well. It's not just like independent is all good and all mainstream is bad or something like that. It's really more to do with production.
And it's also very important in our films that the sex scene is a collaborative effort between the performers. It's not, I will never say this, I will never give a script and say it's set in stone. It's very important that the performer I'm collaborating with, that they have their say, so it's mutually pleasurable and mutually satisfying.
Yeah. I guess then the other part of that then is like the sex scenes that we shoot, we try as much as possible to show a very real depiction of sex. Like we don't cut away from awkwardness of putting on condoms. We don't necessarily prioritize the coming as like the end, like a heterosexual like ending of the sex. So there's just little differences along the whole way, I guess, that make it something else.
And how important for you is it to have a female crew? Do you always have a female crew, or do you sometimes have a female DOP and sometimes you have a male DOP, or do you feel this difference in also how the gaze is portrayed then in your films?
I'm non-binary, so I think honestly shooting this stuff helped me to figure that out, because they kept saying like, oh, it's the female gaze, and I'm like, I don't know what that means. But we do tend to have women and marginalized gender identities behind the camera on the crew, and I do think that it's just that lived experience that just gives you a slightly different lens to look through. Like maybe you're not that well versed in mainstream pornography, and so you're just shooting in a different way. Like you're not trying to replicate what you're trying to replicate what you think looks good. And I think it also comes down to maybe making the set a really safe and supportive place. So we definitely tend to crew with not men, but not excluding men on purpose. Sometimes we have the occasional man.
And do you still face sometime, I still hear sometimes from some, feminist circles, the critique of porn in general as, porn being bad, as was somehow the main feminist stance in like the 70s and the 80s. Do you still have to face these critiques, and how do you deal with them, and how do you respond to them in like, if you get this, general, putting porn into one little bubble and just saying that it's bad for women and it's not feminist and it can be feminist and so on?
Do you want me to do this one, Mog, or you?
Yes, I'll leave it to you. You're the expert.
I kind of like, so we have had this a few times. Like sometimes media will put you, like they won't tell you, and they'll be like, oh, here's an anti-porn feminist for you to fight. And you're like, oh. So honestly, I think a lot of their arguments, like two things can be true at once, and there's nuance here, right? Like there can be problems with pornography and the way that children consume porn, and all of those things can be true, while simultaneously that porn and sexuality are an intrinsic part of our lives, that looking at fetishized or sort of pornographic images are a pretty healthy part of a normal sexuality and all that sort of stuff. So those things can coexist, I think personally, at the same time. So often it's like, if they've made a statement that is that general, we kind of just try to unpack it and be like, well, you're lumping in a hell of a lot of a big thing into one tiny little statement that all porn is terrible and evil and bad. And it often falls apart under the light when you sort of prodded it a little bit, because often it's either a misunderstanding or, again, an egregious oversimplification that all porn is this like huge capitalistic machine, when we've got sort of, DIY porn, we've got feminist porn, we've got ethical porn. Like, what do you mean when you say all porn is bad? So that's how usually we would find it.
And what do you think that are the biggest challenges of independent production as you do it? What are the main, challenges you face? Also, because probably, your productions are small, and how do you reach your audiences and so on? Perhaps this is a question for both of you and your personal views of, what are the biggest, struggles for you guys?
What do you reckon, Mog?
Well, I think obviously financially, because I pay for all of the production, and I like to pay my performers equally and fairly, and also I don't like to perform with complete strangers, so I like to get to know a performer. A lot of times it happens to be a friend that I'm performing with, so that makes it a lot easier. And and in terms of getting the films out there, we try to submit to as many film festivals as we can, and then we've got arrangements with Pink and White Label TV and Erica Lust, and we have our films screened there.
Yeah, I think outside of just the financial aspect, I would say things like shadow banning and trying to use social media to promote, like we can't really promote anything. We can't run ads. We can't, do a lot of that stuff because of the censorship of sort of sex work on the major platforms. So, yeah.
So on social media, you're basically not allowed to, or are you getting banned if you promote your work? Or
so we've kind of been a little shadow banned before. We've sort of had like things deleted off of our hosting services, just, things like, and again, full service sex workers experience this on a scale 100 to what we are, because we're just distributors and filmmakers. But it does mean like that we can't really do a lot in terms of promotion on the major platforms. There's always, you can always go to Discord or whatever and like promote that way. But certainly in terms of mainstream and our own self-promotion, it is a little bit challenging, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And in your film, you also deal a lot with Morgana, trying to, be age positive, and your films being age positive. Could you talk a bit about why this is important, and yeah, just perhaps a bit more of your, personal view of why you think, this is something that should be a common effort, to be age positive in sexuality.
True. Oh, look, I just found that as soon as I got married and had children, basically society wants you to disappear, particularly as a sexual woman. And then when you get to a certain age, once again, society's telling you it's over for you now. And so that's why it's very important for me and my films that we can celebrate our sexuality, that we can celebrate being a sexual being, and regardless of what body type and what your views are, to be able to celebrate and not put an expiry date on our sexuality. But I particularly found it, as like I said, as soon as you got married and have children, life was already planned out and it's over for you in terms of your sexuality.
And Josie, perhaps also, if you,
I honestly had never heard of this stuff until Morgana told me, but I was like, it hadn't occurred to me that it was needed. But after hearing about it from her, I was like, oh my God, of course, this is important. Like, of course. And then I was like on board for sure. I was like, this is the only thing I want to do. But I think it's incredibly important. Like I see, it happening to people's mothers, their grandmothers and stuff. Like they feel like they can't explore or do anything. They feel like their life is over at 50, which is just crazy, right? Like a lot of us are going to live to 70, 80, 90. So I don't know. I just think Morgana's paving the way to be like, and not, obviously there's an incredible history behind her as well. But I think just being reminded that you can do any of this stuff at any time and maybe have a good time is definitely something worth fighting for.
And do you think, is there a community in making, ethical porn, of, you know, also other H-positive artists perhaps that you've met and could connect with, or just share some experience in this sense?
I haven't been able to form a community in Australia, particularly of a similar age to myself. I had a big community in Berlin, and I find that the community in Berlin and in Europe to be a lot bigger and a lot more supportive, and just more people.
In Permission for Pleasure, which is your production company, what's the most important goal you have, and when making films, you know, do you have any, you know, and how do you perhaps also decide what's your next film going to be? What's your creative process, if we call it that way?
To be honest, my creative process, it could be something that happens during the day that sparks an idea for me. I don't actually have a creative process per se. I like to, if I want to explore a part of my sexuality, that usually ends up being a film idea. So, for example, we're in the talks about doing threesomes, for example. So that's what I'd like to explore, threesomes. So that will be the subject of my next film. So basically, it's me still exploring my sexuality and making films out of them.
And also perhaps touching upon another topic that's very present in your film is also mental health. You mentioned depression and, you know, bipolar tendencies. I felt when I was watching the documentary that the parts that deal with these issues, these topics, are somehow even more intimate than the sexuality. I mean, at least for me, they felt even more intimate. And I was wondering how difficult was it to, on one hand, portray this on film as being you, the director, Josie, and on the other hand, you, Morgana, as being the one portrayed in such a difficult, you know, situation and state of mind as, you know, depression and similar states are.
Look, I found it was quite difficult and quite challenging to deal with the mental health side of my life. It's something that I've suffered since the age of about 16. So I've had mental health issues most of my life, and it was difficult being filmed, but I felt it was actually important for it to be filmed and included in the documentary, because you know what, we all don't have happy lives and live happily ever after. We can have an amazing life and still have hardships, and I felt that it was important that people could see the two sides, the struggle that I have, and it is a constant struggle, and yeah, I just felt that it was important that it was included.
And I think for Isabel and I, like, again, we definitely didn't know going in. I think we just thought it would, you know, end maybe with the Phoenix and be this triumphant rise. And I think when things started sort of unraveling for you, Mog, we have to remember Morgana was in the middle of creating her own film about this stuff called The Life of Bi, which is partially where most of the end of the film's footage comes from. It's this, and it's, you know, it's interwoven with Isabel's beautiful animation as well. But that film Morgana was making and was very adamant that we document it and don't shy away from showing your truth. So I think, you know, the whole time we were in dialogue, just checking in and being like, are we definitely filming this? Yep, we're definitely, you know, wanting to show the reality of what it's like living with mental illness. So again, Morgana, it was because you were so gracious to let us in and be that brave and share so intimately. So yeah. It was hard, but it definitely, you know, I guess we worked together.
It was necessary, I think. I don't believe I would have been the complete subject without my mental health being included in the documentary.
Yeah, it would have felt like it would have felt like something.
I would have felt a little bit of a fraud, I think.
And Josie, you mentioned animation, I was also wondering, what were your decisions? Because it's not a very typical documentary in the sense of, just having talking heads and showing Morgana doing her thing, but it's also very artsy in the sense of, exploring also some experimental footages, animation. Did this come later on in the stage of making the film? And what was the idea behind those parts of the film that are a bit more experimental?
So probably the experimental stuff with the porn is a combo of me and Morgana's sort of taste in terms of how we like to shoot bodies and sex. And then the animation and sort of the miniatures, and Isabel, please don't kill me, you speak much more eloquently about this than I do. But basically, because Isabel comes from, she's an incredible stop motion animator anyway, and because she has that background, we were able to use her skills. So we kind of built this backbone mythology based on, so obviously I think most of you will have seen the film, but like Morgana's Phoenix Red Rope birthday extravaganza, we took that as the basis for creating this rest of the mythology. So Red Rope obviously becomes a symbol of like passion and like all that sort of stuff, and that's weaved the whole way through the film. And we decided, because Morgana's films are kind of bombastic and big and symbolic, that we would create miniatures that sort of kept up that sort of mythology aspect and sort of created this sort of like fairy tale beginning, sort of like a dark fairy tale that descends and clashes with reality, which sounds crazy when I say it out loud, but I think it works. I think it works. But yeah, so I think it was kind of a collaboration between Morgana's own film direction and how she likes those films to be, my shooting style, and then me and Isabel's skills with her animation that sort of like swirled around and this is what came out.
Great, thank you. Perhaps for the end, there's also in your film this feeling of your story kind of not being over, in the sense of, as you just mentioned, it's not this phoenix rising and just flying away. Did you have any double thoughts of what was made at the end, Morgana? Did you have any concerns of how the film is portraying you, or also perhaps for Josie, how long was this editing process? As you said that there was so much material, and I'm wondering, this probably took you so many decisions and so much time as well.
Well, actually, I was very lucky to have Josie and Isabel being co-directors, because they took me into consideration every step of the way. There were no surprises. There was always dialogue between us. So if ever I felt uncomfortable, we just didn't go ahead with it. So, while we were shooting, we were always in constant communication. And like I said, there was nothing in the documentary that I'm upset about, because we had been communicating all throughout the 5 years of the making of it. And they were very considerate to take my opinions into consideration.
I think we even, we definitely, so Morgana wasn't in the edit process itself, but we wanted to do right by you, Mog, and share the cut with her before we completely locked. Obviously we didn't want to like sit down and watch it in front of a film festival with her for the first time, because that would be stressful for everybody. So we watched it together just before we kind of locked the cut. And again, Morgana, I think like you had like one tiny change to remove a relative or something from a photo, like it was inconsequential. So the whole way we were really conscious of the ethics of, not wanting to, do anything to hurt Mog, obviously. So we just navigated it again through dialogue, which I think kind of worked for this project.
And perhaps for the end, I'm also interested in the life of this documentary, since it came out in 2019, and then the pandemic hit, and the cinemas closed and the festivals didn't happen and so on. I'm wondering, how is it doing? And perhaps also, is it shown in regular festivals, in genre festivals as is ours? Or how do you feel the documentary is spreading in the world, and what's your feel about the responses so far?
Well, we got one big premiere before the world went away. So we had our premiere at Melbourne International Film Festival in our home, that's like our home city. So it was kind of nice. And then, yeah, the pandemic hit. So we haven't been, like, we're all in Melbourne. So we've been in one of the longest lockdowns. We haven't been to a single other screening. I think we just got to go to one, I think a month ago in Melbourne, like a smaller one. I guess it's been screening it sort of went to Fantasia, and they did a lot in Australia, and then like sort of more genre-y type, and a lot of queer festivals have picked it up. We're really happy, like it's gone all over the world. We even had a local cinema run in Australia, so we did get distribution in Australia, and which was exciting. We couldn't go. It just happened without us. So it's kind of strange because we're just sitting in our bedrooms like, oh, our film is like out in the world and we are just at home, which feels very strange. And we sometimes text about how it feels like invisible or kind of strange. But I think honestly, for like an independent film made for a tiny self-raised budget with some, last minute support and stuff, yeah, I don't think we could ask for much more. And I guess, Mog, like you get responses from people directly in terms of like
yes,
responding to the
film. I get a lot of people messaging me directly and telling me that they've seen the film and that they're inspired by it, and they just love the film. So it's wonderful news always.
Well, I think I'd like to thank you both for joining me for this conversation. Thank you so much once again for your film. It's amazing. It really is inspiring, and I really enjoyed watching it, and I think I will rewatch it in the cinema, because we do have the option of cinema screenings right now. It's still a bit limited, but we have half. The festival is online and in the cinemas, so I think I'm going to go there and have the real experience as well. And thank you so much for taking time and talking to us. And I wish you all the best with your work in the future.
Thank you, Petra. That's lovely. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.